The only people that may claim they can fully get off the hook is like a young Earth creationist, which may have their own problems that we'll talk about in a sec. So let's just dive into that, John, to start things off. So some people might point to like saying the fall, and the fall can fully explain animal suffering. So can you talk a little bit about that idea and why you and how you critique it and why you think it ultimately falls short?
Well, um, it's of course an ancient explanation going back into earliest Christianity, at least some. And it's important to know not all Christians in the historic Christian tradition thought that the fall of Adam and Eve explained the origin of evil. Even theologians like Augustine, who believed there was a fall, also believed that it didn't really explain why there was so much evil and unpleasantness in nature. And so he developed a different theory about why that those kinds of so-called natural evils might exist, poisonous spiders, and he gives a whole list of things in nature that aren't very well explained by a human fall. And one of the problems that I underscore is well, there's a moral impropriety. If you really think about it, why would it makes some sense, at least, that God would punish or allow the consequences of human sin to fall upon human beings, so that you would have the propriety would be that a human being sins and human beings suffer. There are problems with that too, because a lot of people have suffered who didn't take part in that original sin. So that's a whole other topic. But that problem, that kind of idea or picture that God would punish descendants or something that ancestors did is really magnified by the notion that God punished, say, billions of animals throughout planetary time because of an act of disobedience um, that a human being did. So why in the world would God punish animals for something that humans did? That's one problem. There are other problems. Even if you believe in a fall, that there was an original pair, that's problematic too, as I'm sure you know, because in evolutionary theory, that's quite disputable. But um, church fathers like Irenaeus said, well, yeah, there was a fall, but it doesn't explain why there was a fall. And that's something I emphasize in the book, that, okay, so Adam and Eve did this horrible thing, so horrible that God found it fitting to bring ruin upon not just humanity, but the entire world of nature, animals, so on. World ruinous fall. But what conditions would have made that possible? The situation that God set up in the beginning had to be tremendously fragile. In other words, it had to be breakable in all those ways. And so that just drives the question more into a deeper layer, doesn't it? So maybe you say, well, the devil, Satan, broke in and caused all this and brought about all this ruin. But then you just push that question I raised back one more step. What accounts for the fragility such that God would allow a being not just to be free to obey or not, but to have that kind of explosive, ruinous potential in the event of disobedience. And then, of course, some Irenaeus said that, and Origen and others, I'm talking about very ancient church fathers, who said that if God is omniscient, he surely knew in the beginning all of this was going to happen anyway. And so there are a lot of problems involved in trying to use the fall as not just as an account of beginnings, but as a theodicy, as an actual explanation, a God justifying explanation for the evils that one was trying to explain.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
it's very vulnerable to criticism. And in my opinion, more than that, I think if you really analyze it in the way I do in the book, I think the appeal to the fall to explain animal suffering in nature is a pretty abject failure.
Hmm. I really appreciate that, John. And I think it's helpful thinking about looking at this dialect, like say that like someone's going to say that like well the choice of Adam and Eve is the response of like all animal suffering. Well, you still have the question of like well God surely knew that like Adam and Eve are going to fall.
Right.
And so you could say the similar thing if you attribute it to like maybe like demonic powers or things like that, which is why yeah I
Right.
really appreciate that, and I think that's a
But
good
then
kind
God
of
would
way of
have known
thinking.
these demonic beings were going to fall too. And then, I thought about this one night. I was reading C.S. Lewis, and some pretty important thinkers have wanted to blame Satan for the fall of nature. They're a little careful in the way they state that, but they entertain this possibility. But I think, isn't that a pretty monstrous thing to ascribe to God, that God would take this being, namely Satan, who makes Freddy Krueger, horror films almost look like an innocent by comparison. You're talking about some being, a superhuman being that wants to destroy, ruin the world in all the ways that we can look around and see that it's ruined. Evils of all kinds. It's at least difficult to imagine God putting a being like that in a position, um, you know, um, where the fate of virtually everyone, human and non-human beings who would ever live, would be at the mercy of a decision such a monster would make. And again, like you suggest, I think God surely would have known, or at least foreseen or sensed that this could. And even if you want to say God didn't know it because you want to preserve the freedom of that creature that turns into such a monster, uh, you would have to be pretty brave to be risking the lives of so many creatures on a bet, a sort of gamble that, well, maybe this being would get it right. Maybe it's a 50-50 chance, but I don't think that works very well. It seems to me that the chances of free beings falling at some point are greater than that, probably close to certain. And that even if God didn't know in the strict sense uh, the future in some detail, that God would have been smart enough not to set things up in that way. So I guess so. What do I think? I think that there is some sense in which God knew the fall would happen, and that God planned um, on a history of redemption. Culminating in Christ, and then all the things that Christ has done in response to the fall. So, the technical word from my view is superlapsarianism. It's a big word, but it basically just means that God planned redemption in Christ before the fall. God wasn't surprised by the fall. The cross and the resurrection of Jesus is not plan B. That's something God came up with. Oh gosh, Adam and Eve have sinned now. I've got to do something different. My sense of it is, anyway, that God knew all along that these measures he would take in Christ, the incarnation, the atonement, the resurrection, all of it, um, were part of the plan from the beginning. Blessed is the Lamb who was slain from the beginning of the world. I take the verses like that pretty seriously. And
Mhm.
there's a lot of precedent for my thinking there in the Christian tradition as well.